Anyway, that brings me to kind of the first topic, Kurt, which you being on the broadcast side and having to deal with this COVID environment and the stay-at-home orders and trying to put on live shows in what 61 different I think you've got 62 stations and 51 different broadcast markets. How in the world do you pull that off?
Yeah, Tim, thank you for having me. And, well, it's been a crazy and interesting year, and look, I think it's I want to say it's things that technology people dream of, problems to be solved. But listen, I think when all of this hit, we had to allow for 6,000 employees to work from home, in a hurry. And the television business, I mean, it's a 24/7, 24/7 business. You got people that work shifts, and so we did, at the very basics, we just didn't even have laptops for every single person. And just we're trying to procure 1,000 laptops during the height of COVID was not, was just another impossible task. Took us a lot longer, but we got that done. The second part was, we still had to maintain on-air operations, right? So we still needed to bring people into the studios. We've done a lot of things remotely, so I could produce, graphics and video and things like that remotely. But ultimately, I got a newscast using 8 to 9 hours of news a day, and I needed to bring people into the studio. So, how do you keep them safe? How do you keep them protected? How do you make sure they don't commingle with others was a challenge. We got through that. And probably the largest lesson we learned, and listen, most companies go through, you have a central set of firewalls and and the VPN services. Well, when you're trying to upload high quality video, that just doesn't work, right? So people working from home, we had to give them units that that bonded cell phones to get you the bandwidth because they didn't have the upload speeds, from their internet providers. We've gone through a lot to make sure we can continue to work right in this remote, COVID-like environment.
Yeah, well, I wonder, what kind of guidance do you actually give the on-air talent when they're trying to, do something from home, and you're looking at their backgrounds, and you're thinking, wait a minute, I don't think you actually want like the neighbor's bull in the picture, or which actually came up in one of my sessions where a window was open and the bull from the back pasture was literally in view, unfortunately.
Listen, and you get into the minutia of, we had to send lighting things at home, right? The ring lights for people's homes, telling them to have, find a, as close to a green screen that you can, or a white screen, keep it as simple. And so a lot of things went into those, and that's why I said, we had to figure all of this out in a hurry because we've never had to do it.
Yeah.
Except maybe in a hurricane-like scenario, but even there, not at the scale that we've had to execute.
Yeah, it had to have been an incredible challenge. So, hey, a little birdie told me that we have this election coming up next week, and I'm sure not many people have really been paying attention to that, but I'm certain it's had an impact on you in the local broadcast space. So, what have you actually seen in terms of sort of activity? Has it sort of changed, viewership habits and things of that nature? And then, more importantly, like, how has data played a role in this political season on the local broadcast level?
Yeah. Yes, we operate two different businesses. The way I think of TEGNA as a company, right? We are traditional local broadcast, and certainly, we've enjoyed the benefits of political ad spend this year. I think it's through the roof, for us and for everyone else in this space. Primarily because, Tim, I mean, like, when you think of local broadcasts, it is probably the last and the closest to a community, right? It's the way, and listen, for many of us, I live in the New York area. It's not, local television is not as big a deal, but when you're in Columbus, Ohio, or Des Moines, Iowa, I mean, that is all the media that you get, right? And that's your feel of community. And from a political perspective, people trying to connect to their local audiences, to their constituents, that's probably the best way to. So it's certainly been a huge inventory, both on our linear side. The second business we operate is an over-the-top platform called Premion, where data has played a huge part in assembling audiences, right? I mean, where we are able to find people that that have an interest in a certain category or a certain kind of theme, right? And all of those kinds of things have been really, really critical in this political season.
Got it. So based on the data spending levels that you've seen, what's your prediction?
Prediction in terms of who's going to win?
Trump or Biden? Come on.
That's a tough question. I'm gonna have to plead the fifth there. But listen, regardless of who wins, I think it's gonna be an interesting next 4 years for this country.
Yeah, I was hoping for some inside baseball there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've tuned into any of the previous sessions, but one of the themes has been sort of change in viewing behaviors, and we've heard some folks talk about one of the most exciting things that happened at the local level was the return of sports. And particularly in smaller markets where the local college team is the event, right? And so without that coming into sort of this football season, you have had a challenge finding, I think, eyeballs that are really kind of highly dedicated to that particular screen at that point in time. So how have you seen sort of viewing behaviors change during this whole pandemic season?
Yeah, this is the way I've been thinking about it, Tim. As global as this pandemic is, its impact has been incredibly local, right? And so what I mean is every one of us, as living in our communities, worries about what happens to your kid's school, right? When does that school open? Where do they go? What happens when it opens? How safe is it? What about your local restaurants, your all of those kinds of things? And, I think as local casters, we have had a banner year in terms of serving our communities, right? Especially at TEGNA. And it's all about, I go back to, I think, we're all craving, information about what's happening in the community, what's safe, what's the the rate of the pandemic, within your walls. And so, we've seen viewership across all of our platforms drive north, if you will, but certainly difference in patterns, right? And so, look, when we all started working from home, I think we all getting up a little later. So morning viewership, came down, but afternoon and evening viewership has risen as people, or even midday, has risen as a result of that. And I think at TEGNA, one of the things that we pride ourselves as a great broadcaster is to deepen the relationship with that community with what we call facts not fear journalism, right? And at the end of the day, that's really, I think, what's been resonating, at least in our audiences, and why we believe people are tuning into TEGNA stations.
Got it. And so are you seeing people like focus on particular are they more tuned into the news these days, the local news, than they have been? Where are they really spending their time?
Yeah, so I think when you think of local broadcasters, Tim, our primary product is news, right, and what we call lifestyle shows, right, and so and everything else is either kind of syndicated programming like Wheel of Fortune, and then that was certainly in the early part of the pandemic, right? There was no sports. Sports has come back in a big way, but most of that I'll say is network related, right? So you got the NBA, the NFL. That certainly brings a tremendous amount of traffic to us. But we've seen viewership across both of those categories, if you will. But certainly local broadcast has been driving in terms of our news product.
Got it. So and also how has sort of the shutdown of the small business, the local businesses, impacted advertising in your local markets?
Yeah, well, and I think you'll see this, when the shutdown first happened, I think impacted everybody, right? And, we're starting to see advertisers come back as things and businesses have started to open back up, especially, the retail sector, the restaurants, right? All of those, as they come back, they're starting to spend money in the local businesses. But, the second quarter and third quarter were rough. Right. And then, I think as you're also starting to see, I mean, the journal yesterday reported, I think auto sales are back up. Right. And, and you're starting to see, I think it's some of the bigger cities as people go back to work, there's more of a fear, if you will, of relying on public transportation.
Yeah.
So, people are starting to say, if I have to go to work, I'm not taking a bus or a train or a subway. So some of that at least is starting to translate into, marketing and advertising spend, back on our properties.
Got it. Great. Okay. Well, look, the primary topic of today, even though I really wanted to kind of understand, what was really happening in the local market was identity in TV.
Yep.
And so, we've had a long history together. We actually sort of grew up in the OTT space together. Our platform really came together at the same time. Premion, your OTT network, was on the rise, and we partnered, I think, very effectively at the beginning and really kind of helped grow each other's businesses. So, given that, what role are you actually seeing in identity today? And in particular, I find your situation to be interesting because not only are you a local broadcaster, you have owned and operated digital properties and quite a few. And, we've worked with you on a number of those and seen different engagement levels. And now you have this very successful OTT network called Premion that, you're trying to balance, spend, and you're attracting dollars, not only on a local level, but also on a national level, and trying to sort of stitch all that together. So, what role has identity played in sort of each one of those channels?
Yeah, so Tim, I'm going to break it down into maybe three broad areas. We think about identity, right? So, the first thing that is still in the early innings that we've spent a decent amount of time thinking about this is what I think is the holy grail on the content side, right? Which is, can you consolidate all of the digital signals that consumers leave, right? Whether it's on social, website visits, right? All of those kinds of things, to really understand, from our business, what content truly resonates with them, right? I'd love to figure out if the audience that we're reaching is a PhD level audience or a high school level audience, because then you could train your on-air talent on the kinds of words they use, the number of words a minute they speak, and whether they're truly resonating with the audience, right? And that is, that's something that is the holy grail for us, to be able to pull all of these things together and really help influence what content we make even before we make it, right? So that I'd say, again, early, but there's a bit of focus there for us. On the television advertising side, we've been doing a lot of things around what we call, or marketers typically call, attribution, right? We have a product called TEGNA Attribution, and as part of that, what we're able to do is really measure who saw an ad, what action did they take from watching that ad, and does that action result in a website visit or a walk-in into a retail location? And does that convert into a conversion? So it's a big step for us. We've been in market for a couple of years with this product, and identity there is again a big thing, because ultimately what consumers or marketers want to know is, what consumers watched it, what platform did they watch it, and Tim, you referenced Premion, which is our OTT network. We're able to look at, how many people watched an ad on linear, how many people watched it on OTT, how many of them resulted in a website, and then pull it all together to really give marketers, those insights about consumers.
So you have a lot of technologies at play, right? In that environment, you've got, your sort of unwired local broadcast, which is very, very difficult to, resolve that down to an individual or an individual household even. And then, you've got your owned and operated properties, digital properties, where you can get right down to an individual. Yeah. And then you've got your OTT, where you literally can, through platforms like ours, and so I'm not ashamed to have a little advertisement there, but the properties like ours that allow you to be able to associate to a household. So how do you make those technologies work together to sort of give you a unified view of your consumer, if you will, across those various screens?
Yeah, so Tim, I think we work with companies yourself. We build capabilities on platforms ourselves, but ultimately, you've got to stitch all of these things together, right? And what I say is, you try to find the breadcrumbs that go together, try to create associations. I think a few years away, maybe decades away. What we're able to do today is, to a certain extent, figure out how deterministic you can be, and then how probabilistic you need to be, right? And the more, the goal is to be as much deterministic as possible. And certainly on your digital platforms, you could be a lot more deterministic than on some of your linear platforms where it's a lot more probabilistic.
Yeah, and are you finding with advertisers that they're accepting of that difference, or are they of this mindset where they're really trying to demand more of that? Get me as close to that one-to-one as possible.
Yeah, so I think there are different types of advertisers, Tim. So, when we think of our Premion business, much of that is an extension of our linear, traditional TV business. And a lot of the buyers that buy on Premion, expect behavior in terms of ad campaigns the same way it delivers on television, right? And then you have folks that have gotten really, really savvy in that space and will want to go really, really deep, right? And and get into, I'm looking for people that are millennially minded, that are in the market for a car or a specific type of car because I have a family that's growing, right? And find me audiences across your platform and portfolio of content that meets that need, right? And so you are seeing different types of requests coming in from advertisers, and our goal is to try and meet those needs as closely as possible.
Yeah. So, local broadcast and OTT are sort of couldn't be more different animals. So yeah. How are you actually seeing data play in each one of those channels?
Yeah, so I think so let's separate it out, right? I mean, on the traditional TV side, I mean, your challenge is, that's a one-way stream, right? And, we have to rely on people like Nielsen and ComScore to provide, what's traditionally the currency of ratings, but then couple that with the insights that they provide about consumers, right? But we do that, we take that, we do a lot of independent research on our own. But ultimately, when I look at, the audience that I'm serving in Minneapolis, right, we come up with what is the makeup of that audience, right? What's that, what percentage of that is audience are what we will call Costco moms, right? What audience are soccer moms, right? And then you start to think about, how do you cater to those audiences? What's the benefit of, and which one is a larger audience that you go after? What's more profitable? Both from a content side, but then that translates into an advertising side, right? And so that's certainly on the television side. We've done a lot of that kind of work across our markets to really try and profile, what's our core audience look like, right? On the digital and the OTT side, as you know, we have access to a lot of great data, working with companies like yourself. And we're able to get to really, really close levels of depth, right? And the challenge in local ultimately is, unlike network or cable, I mean, you're working with a smaller universe. So ultimately, scale is you got to make sure you can hit the scale, and you try to do one too many factors, you just don't have that scale. But so far, I think we're getting fairly sophisticated in what we're able to reach there.
So yeah, given sort of the two different approaches and the ability to target down at different levels, TV is still kind of working its way through to living up to the promise of sort of a single view of an audience across various screens, right? And yeah, technology is helping sort of bring it together, but it's a little harder. It's a little harder on the traditional and wired broadcast side. In your side, where you're having to use sort of tools that are more modeled than sort of really scaled one-to-one type solutions. Yeah. But there are scenarios where that linear and that OTT can work well together, right? So what's been TEGNA's experience with sort of combining OTT with linear and vice versa?
Yeah, so let's think about, what I talked about, the attribution product, right? We could do that across both of those platforms, right? And our attribution product is based on people watching smart TVs on glass. So it is very much like a digital experience, and we're able to to get very precise on the household that's watching it, not necessarily the individual, but you can make patterns, right? I mean, it's kind of sort of the age old, people watching sports may tend to be more male than female, but those are a little more generalized, but you can start to make those kind of associations. But what we're able to go to marketeers and advertisers with is a package that says, if you're trying to reach consumers, right, and make sure that they're actually resulting in conversion, we can reach them on all of these platforms that TEGNA has, and then and put a case for it together on how that conversion across all of these platforms.
Right. So in your situation, you've seen a lot of different use cases for linear plus OTT. And where are you seeing that most used today? How are you seeing that most used today?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the types of clients like furniture retailers as an example, right, who are trying to drive walk-ins to their store, right, or auto dealerships. They're trying to reach consumers that are both kind of sort of reach as well as depth. And so they are they're the kinds of folks we go after and say this would be a great product for you, right? And then we try to reach audiences for them across all of our product lines, and then aggregate that back across, right? And then you do have, Tim, certainly you have advertisers that just want to reach people on OTT or on linear, and we could do that same service for them. But we certainly show that. The other thing that I think we've also seen through this, through the last 2 years, is that the overlap between OTT and linear is not always as big, especially in certain categories of consumers. And so, there's an added value on why an advertiser should try to reach consumers in multiple platforms, to drive effective kind of conversion.
So in situations where you have somebody who's trying to just do a simple reach extension, for example, are they really focused more today with the OTT piece on demo or age and gender, or are they really trying to employ data and take it to the next level?
Yeah, I think it depends on the types of buyers. Like I said, I mean, a traditional television buyer, I think, is most comfortable, even in an OTT environment, mirroring how they buy television, right? And then you have, and within agencies now, you have kind of the traditional linear buyers, and then you have, the digital buyers. The digital buyers traditionally, I think, are much more, data driven. But you are starting to see a lot of the traditional linear TV buyers applying data, want to do more with data, want to know more about the insights that they can gather from these campaigns that they're running, and then kind of sort of how do you use that as input for the next set of campaigns that they run with us.
Right. So one of the challenges that we've seen here at Cadent has been the traditional TV buyer who wants to, whether it's experiment or really start to leverage OTT, really tries to buy it at sort of the same level that they're buying their traditional linear buys, right? They want to do one-to-one network alignment, and it's almost more just trying to get that at the network or that particular program level, which of course isn't the real promise of OTT. OTT is supposed to be, or CTV, that next level where you can actually use much richer data sets. You can get this down to a much more granular level and really not only drive the measure business outcomes, right? So, everybody kind of has a view on this. What's your view on what it's going to take to bring traditional TV buyers over to where they're doing more of a true audience buy?
Yes, I think we're still fairly early, Tim, in this process. There's lots of reasonings, right? I mean, when I am coming from a technology background, the platforms that currently exist that support either how agencies buy and transact or sellers sell and transact are fairly legacy, right? And so just those things I think require a lift, if you will, to be able to support outcomes and impressions and what I would generally call a common currency to be able to go across platforms, right? And so, they are, the partners and vendors are all working on this. And it's kind of sort of, I think, a little bit of a chicken and egg, because I think the buyers are not necessarily ready for it, but because maybe the budgets are not in place the way they come down. But ultimately, I think we're on a path where you'll over the next few years and make OTT and television buying, I think, much more seamless, with a common currency, with a common type of measurement on outcomes, and then with the plumbing that's required to make it less cumbersome than it is today.
Great. Thanks, Kurt. So we have a lot of questions, and actually it'll take me longer to sort through them than to actually answer them. But so let me kind of get down to a couple of things that we're gonna satisfy a couple of techies in this room. And the first question is around ATSC 3.0.
Yep.
And for you might want to just take a minute, because a lot of marketers on the call that might not understand what that is. Explain what it is and explain how that actually can make a difference in the local broadcast space.
Yeah, so in many of our markets, local television is distributed to consumers in multiple ways, right? You can get it through your satellite providers like a DirecTV, or your traditional cable providers like a Comcast. But in growing markets, we also distribute it over the air, right? What used to be called the rabbit ear antenna has been replaced by powerful, indoor antennas. And as people cut the cord or shave the cord, right, we have seen an increase in what's called as over-the-air OTA antenna reception by consumers. So as with ATSC 3.0 is the next generation of television, which makes television very similar to a broadband experience. So what that enables us is, I could send a broadcast out on over the air and receive back from that television. So all the things that you could do in digital, like data targeting, identity, consumer reach, right? It all becomes a reality on the advertising side. And then certainly from a content perspective, that gets exciting is, we can also do contextual content, right? And I can make that TV experience look like Netflix. Make it, so you'll imagine you're watching a show and you're able to click a button on your remote and say, I want more information. And up pops a menu of VOD content that may be, additional information around that. And then I could, and for broadcasters, again, a lot of these models have to be proven out, but you could then start to think about, do you do that additional as as a subscription model, or as an ad option, ad supported model? So again, very, very early. But TEGNA as a company is committed to ATSC 3.0. We've launched in Portland, Oregon early this year, and this year we'll be in 4 other markets. And the industry as a whole will be in the top 40 markets by the end of next year.
Yeah. Great, thanks. So next question. So when everything is back to normal, I don't know how we're ever going to redefine normal, right? I don't know what normal is going to be, but when everything is back to normal, how will your industry have changed, and will it have changed permanently?
Yeah, so I think, like a lot of us, we've learned a lot, right? So if we had tried to produce content in a remote capacity as a tech or a business project pre-COVID, I think that would have been a tough, that certainly would have been a tough endeavor to go. I think this pandemic has really shown us that we could do things that we never imagined we could do, right? And so we are going through the process of rethinking, right? What are things that continue to make sense to do it the way we used to do it versus how we've learned to do it during COVID? And then does it make sense to continue, right, doing some things in the old fashion or the new fashion? But I fundamentally think, like every other industry, we are going to fundamentally rethink, what makes sense going forward.
Great, thanks. So, okay, another one with cross-device campaigns. Are you finding it challenging when it comes to reconciliation? In other words, the orchestration issues across the various platforms. You use one platform to deliver ad in your local broadcast business. you use another platform for OTT, and where you're trying to synchronize things. What kind of challenges are you having sort of making that happen, orchestrating that, and then reconciling the results?
Yeah, well, it's not an easy feat by any means, and I think the delivery mechanisms are all very different today, and so it's a cumbersome process. And then that goes back to what I was saying before. I think the plumbing is not in place today, which inhibits the true cross-function capabilities and the opportunities that people want to take advantage of, both on the buy side and the sell side. But all making strides on in making improvements there and automating as much of that as possible and integrating it as much as possible.
Got it. Okay. So let's see. So are you finding new technologies to be more effective today? Or are you thinking about technologies differently than before the pandemic started?
Well, I think, I don't know about thinking about new technologies differently. I mean, we're certainly looking for new technologies, but as I shared, Tim, the lessons coming out of COVID are asking us to reimagine how we process business, in the past, and how can technology help us, right? So things like AI now, is it becoming, more mainstream. Our ability to produce content, in a very different fashion other than physically going into a building are things we're looking at. And our challenges, listen, one of the things that we know is we've been able to do this within a COVID environment. And to some people will say we do it at scale. The question is, can you do it truly at scale all the time, in an economical model that makes sense?
Okay, so let's talk ratings, because all marketers love to talk about ratings, right? So on your local broadcast stations, how do you see your ratings in 5 years from today?
Well, I probably the wrong person to ask that question. Look, I would hope the ratings continue to drive up north. I think what we are trying to do, as I said, is really figure out how we use data to make our content relevant to our audiences, right? I'm a big believer that consumers will consume your products if it's relevant to them. And I think with more data and more analytics around that data and smart people making decisions, we should be able to drive consumption up and not down.
Got it. Okay, great. Well, thanks for the time, Kurt. I really appreciate it. TEGNA has been a tremendous partner of my prior company, For Info, and continue to be a great partner of Cadent. And we've done some very interesting things together. Look into a future where we can continue to do some interesting things, and really do appreciate your support.
Tim, it's been our pleasure as well working with you and Cadent, and appreciate you having me on this forum. So thank you.
Thank you. Ritesh, all yours.
Amazing. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Kurt and Tim. Again, every time I listen to experts in this particular area, I just feel like there's so much to learn. I mean, the world is getting complex. For someone like you, Kurt, who has so many different TV stations across the country, local is in fact going to continue to gain strength. And you're absolutely right. I mean, what people need now is local community connection more than anything else. It's immediate questions, like, is my grocery store safe to go? I'm based in Toronto, and there's actually an app that was developed early on in the COVID world where you could actually see the number of people waiting in line before you got to the store. Very basic things, but be able to pick that up, as something that we can do as an advertiser to just really help the community. So thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And before we bring in the final panel of the day, I wanted to share another quick short video clip with all of you.